Hey, I hope this is recording. This is just a short recording on the final project. I just sent out an email. Everyone should have gotten an email. If you haven't, let me know. But everyone should have gotten an email kind of outlining the final project and telling you who your group members are, right? So this would be about the time when I think people will have questions on the final project. And if you have questions at any time, just ask. But let me just kind of lay it out for you real quick here. And I've talked about it a little bit, during that course introduction. But basically for the final project, what you have to do in your groups of four, we have groups of four, is first come up with a research topic. You've already been reading now about how to come up with a topic, brainstorming, come up with a research area that's not too broad, not too narrow, that's appropriate for a single study. I mean, this would ideally be something that could be published in a journal, right? Like a 25-page journal article. Now, you're not going to do all that. You're not going to actually collect data and write a complete article. You're just going to basically do the first half of an article, okay? So you have to come up with a topic, come up with some research questions and hypotheses, figure out what method you're going to use. Remember, we've got three main methods. So every single one of you, there are only four groups, but all four groups, you're either going to do a content analysis, a survey, or an experiment. If you want to do some combination, that's fine, but I wouldn't necessarily try to make things more difficult on yourself. So choose one of those methods. Come up with a research topic, identify your method, your hypotheses and or research questions, and then write it out. The final product is gonna look like this. You're gonna have obviously a title, and I want a nice working title, like a legit title. I mean, by now you should. I mean, by the time you guys get to that point, you will have read journal articles, from your literature review and from the article review assignments. So you'll have a feel for how titles work. Almost, I mean, 95% of the titles they're like double titles. You'll notice this. There's like a colon, right? It'll be like, press freedom in Egypt, colon, an examination of the press under President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, or something like that. I'm just making that up, but that's kind of a typical title. So title, then a short abstract, 75 words or so, 75 words or less, and then the main text starts. I want an introduction. Now pay attention. In your introduction, which should be about a page and a half, maybe 2 pages long, you're going to tell me what the topic is in broad terms. That's what an introduction does. It gives some background, like what's going on here, like why are we interested in this issue to begin with. So for example, I'm working on a study right now. I'm kind of finishing it on the American newspaper coverage of the Black Lives Matter protest movement, right? So I give, in the introduction, my co-author and we talk about kind of the background, like what happened, with kind of the spate of shootings that happened and so on and so forth, allegations of police brutality and, just kind of giving some background with citations. So that's what you want to do in your introduction. What's the topic? What's the background? In your introduction, you have to answer the so what question. And you also have to give what we call a purpose statement. This has to be there. I'm going to look for it. And you can be very explicit with it. You might start off, give me your topic, give me a little background, and then you might be real explicit at the top of one of your paragraphs, maybe at the top of page 2. You might say something like, the purpose of this study is to whatever, right? But there has to be an explicit purpose statement. And after the purpose statement, that's when you answer the so what question. Like, why would anybody care about this? Like, why is this? What's the broader importance of this research paper? That's your introduction. Okay. After the introduction, I expect a literature review. The literature review will be around 2.5 pages, maybe up to 3. And in your literature review, that's, by now you know this, but that's where you're going to review prior scholarly research in that area. I want you to review a minimum of 6 peer-reviewed journal articles in your broad area. Now this might be a little tricky. Sometimes students have difficulty figuring out, like, okay, what is this? What is my area, right? So for example, the topic that I just did, or that I'm working on, with the Michael Brown, the Black Lives Matter protests, we actually did a double literature review. We reviewed literature on coverage of race, how the American news media treat race. So we did a review where we looked at all the studies that have examined race, okay, that have looked at how African Americans are portrayed compared with white people, and so on and so forth. And then the other area that we did was we looked at protest movements covered, because there's a whole body of literature on American news coverage of protests, how the American news media report on protests. So we looked at those studies that studied that issue. And we did like a two-pronged research, two-pronged literature review. So you just have to figure out what your topic area is. If you have some trouble, you should be able to figure it out. But if you have trouble, let me know. And I'll kind of brainstorm with you, and we can identify your topic area. That's the lit review. Then comes the theoretical framework. Probably a couple pages or so on your theoretical framework. That's where you're going to say, at the start of that section, this paper or this research is informed by such and such theory, and then proceed to basically explain the theory. I want you to use at least two scholarly sources. It could be a book, but a couple of sources that talk about the theory, that explain the theory, right? That talk about its assumptions, how it's used, what other scholars have found using this theory, right? And then at the end of the theoretical, or actually before we get to the end, after you've explained the theory, talk about how you are going to apply this theory. How is this research related to what you're doing, okay? And ideally, if you're doing your research right, your theory should lead into your hypotheses, okay? Your hypotheses should be basically based on, grounded in your theory. Otherwise, what's the point of having the theory, right? So, and you can have hypotheses that are also informed by your literature review. That's also fair. At the end of the theoretical framework section, you should write out your hypotheses. That's where I want to see your hypotheses. Even though sometimes it's done a little bit differently in some of the articles, that's the dominant way, and this is how I want you to do it. I want you to put your hypotheses and or research questions at the end of the theoretical framework section. You might have a little section after that kind of explaining the research questions and or hypotheses, right? After that comes the methodology section. The methodology section will probably be 3 pages, maybe 3.5 pages long. You're going to tell me, this research employs content analysis, or it employs survey methodology, or it employs an experiment, whatever. And then just go through it in the same way that you've been reading and that you will read, how people are explaining their methodology, right? I mean, go through what's your, first of all, explain what that method is, why you've chosen it, why that method is useful. Go into an explanation of your sample, right? Who did you sample, or what units? What was your unit of analysis? And I want to talk about unit of analysis. Talk about your key variables. What are you, seeking to measure? Like if you did a survey, what are some of the questions? What was the line of questioning? If you did a content analysis, what are some of the questions in your coding sheet, right? So anyways, go through all of that. That's your and then at the end of that's basically the end of the body of the paper. After that, I want to see your references, and then at the very end, your appendix. And the appendix is really important. It's related to the method. Because if you did a survey, I want to see the questionnaire. If you did an experiment, most likely you used a questionnaire. That's how most experiments are done in our field. I want to see the questionnaire in the appendix. If you did a content analysis, I want to see the coding sheet in the appendix. Okay? So the appendix is critical. That methodology section is worth 40 points out of the 100 points. So that's the most important section of the paper. And the appendix is part of that. The appendix is part of that. Now let me say something about unit of analysis. Some of you did a nice job, by the way, on your reflection papers. You decided to talk about unit of analysis, and I thought you guys did a nice job. But sometimes students have some difficulty with this. So what is a unit of analysis? A unit of analysis is, as the readings were showing or trying to explain, it's kind of the specific component part that you are focusing your research on. It's the specific thing that you're studying. And it's important because at the end of the day, when you get to the results section, when you have the findings, now in your final project, you're not going to have findings because you're not going to collect the data. But if you were to go on and do this project, the findings are discussed in terms of the unit of analysis. So for example, when you do a survey, if I wanted to survey UNA students about something, whatever it is, my unit of analysis is the individual student, the individual person, okay? And so at the end of the day, when I present my survey results, I'm going to talk about them in those terms. I'm going to say 48% of the students, 48% of the people surveyed. That's my unit, right? Said this or believed this or whatever. If I'm doing a content analysis, this unit of analysis gets a little bit trickier. So let's say I wanted to, let's stick with the example that I've been giving you, this study that I'm finishing up now on the Black Lives Matter protest movement, coverage of the Black Lives Matter protest movement. My colleague and I, we decided to research New York Times coverage and St. Louis Post Dispatch coverage, okay, over a period of about 6 months. Now, we can't study every single article, so we took a sample, and then we have to decide on our unit of analysis. We decided that we wanted to focus on individual articles. The unit of analysis that we chose was the individual news article published in the St. Louis Post Dispatch or the New York Times. So at the end, when we have our results, we'll be talking in terms of individual news articles. So we'll say, for example, that 73% of the articles in the New York Times quoted a police officer, for example. I'm just making that up, but you get the idea. We'll be speaking in terms of the unit of analysis, which is the article. Now, that's not a given. We could have chosen, some people decide when they study news that they're going to focus on the individual paragraph. That gives them a lot more units. So then you would say 82% of the paragraphs in this newspaper did this or said this. Do you understand? What do you want to focus on? Some people only analyze the headlines and say the unit of analysis is the headline. When people are doing movies, people sometimes focus on the individual scene. That's very common when they do content analysis on movies. They'll have 20 movies in their sample, right? But their individual unit of analysis is the scene. And there are 20 scenes or so per movie, so they end up with about 400 units, okay? And they talk in those terms. Out of the 400 units, 50% of them featured a female character, whatever. So the individual scene. Another thing, sometimes people will divide the movie up into time segments. So like 15-minute segments or half an hour segments or whatever. And so each unit will be every 30 minutes of the movie, for example, is their unit of analysis in some studies that I've read. So it just depends. If you're doing a content analysis of songs, you might have the individual verse would be your unit of analysis. So I wanted to say something about unit of analysis because it's been talked about in the readings and it becomes important as you get closer to the final project and also on the midterm. I mean, you need to understand it. If you don't understand, if it's not clear, I recommend that you do a little bit of reading. It's always good to do independent reading. Go back to the book, go back to Baxter and Babby, go to the internet, and then if it's still not clear, do not hesitate to ask me. And what we can do is, and I don't mind doing this at all, we can set up a Skype session where I just kind of talk you through it, and we can, give some examples, and I think that would be really useful. Okay, so that is all I got. How do I stop this thing?